What is that? Your grandpa's antique. You trying to shoot or start a museum? Laughter echoed. Across the range, she said nothing. No glare, no comeback. Just a calm breath. She raised the rusty rifle and fired. The slow, steady sound of an M1 Garand being loaded. 8 shots, all center mass. The general passing by froze mid-step. His coffee didn't make it to his lips. That stance, it wasn't from a manual. It was from a rooftop in Tunisia, 30 years ago. And the man who saved his life had taught her how to stand. He stepped forward and saluted her. Not the way civilians do, but the way soldiers do when they see legacy in motion. The gravel crunched beneath the boots of Rebecca Becky Hart as she stepped out of her truck, the early morning light casting a golden haze over the hills of Redwood Valley Range. She moved with quiet confidence, no swagger, no theatrics, just calm focus. On her head sat a weathered cap bearing the red and blue insignia of the 82nd Airborne Division. Its colors faded by time, not fashion. It wasn't store-bought, it wasn't trendy. It was handed down. Over her shoulder, she carried something that drew more than a few sideways glances. An M1 Garand rifle wrapped in an old oiled cloth. The rifle didn't gleam. It didn't look tactical. It wasn't covered in attachments or sleek carbon finishes. It was scratched, scarred, and darkened from decades of use. But Becky cradled it as if it were something sacred. She didn't head straight to a bench or try to impress anyone. She just waited quietly at the check-in counter, nodded politely to the staff, and then moved to her usual lane once it opened. Lane 4. The same one she'd requested every other Saturday for the past 3 years. She laid the rifle on the bench with care, unrolling the cloth slowly. The scent of gun oil and cedar wafted faintly into the crisp air. Her hands moved with practiced precision, not hurried, not hesitant. As the cloth unfolded, the dark walnut stock of the M1 emerged, worn smooth in places from generations of grip. Carved faintly on the side were initials, EH, when in beneath them, barely visible unless you knew where to look, the outline of a parachute. Her grandfather, Sergeant Edward Hart, had carried this very rifle through Europe in the final year of World War II and later in Korea. Becky never treated it like a relic. It wasn't just a keepsake, it was a responsibility. He hadn't given it to her in a ceremony. No velvet case, no speech. He simply walked her out behind his farmhouse the day she turned 18, placed the Garand in her hands and said, "This isn't a gift. This is what I leave behind that still breathes." Every scratch on the stock had a story. Every groove in the grip had been molded by duty. And Becky never added to those markings carelessly. She kept it clean, not showroom polished, but respectfully functional. She always loaded the rounds by hand. No fancy tools, no shortcuts, just brass, wood, and steel. At Redwood Valley Range, amid the noise of modern rifles and tactical gadgets, Becky stood out, not because she tried to, but because she carried something none of them could buy. A rifle with memory, a stance with inheritance, a silence that spoke volumes. The moment Becky laid the old M1 Garand on the bench, the whispers began. "Is that a musket?" Someone snorted from 2 lanes over. "Looks like she pulled it out of a museum exhibit. I mean, come on, what is this? A Civil War reenactment?" The chuckles grew louder as 3 young men in full tactical gear leaned casually against the firing dividers. They were in their early 20s, fresh faces and expensive equipment. Plate carriers that had never seen mud. Gloves with tags still dangling. Rifles covered in attachments, laser sights, bipods, red dots, each one gleaming and sterile. Becky said nothing. She unrolled the faded cloth around her Garand, revealing the well-worn walnut stock and dark steel barrel. The scratches on the wood were deep, the grip polished by time, and the initials carved faintly near the sling mount, EH, looked like they had been there longer than most of the men in the room had been alive. One of the young shooters cocked his head, eyes dancing with mischief. "Hey, sweetheart, what are you trying to do with that thing? Start a fire or win a war?" Another added, "She probably saw a W2Y2 movie and thought it'd be cute for TikTok." More laughter. Still, Becky remained silent. She didn't even glance in their direction. Instead, she moved with ritual care, her hands steady as she laid out 8 30-06 cartridges in a neat line on the bench. Each round gleamed faintly in the sunlight, spaced exactly a finger's width apart. She checked the sights on the rifle, then wiped a smudge from the rear aperture with a small piece of cloth tucked in her pocket. No earbuds, no music, just the quiet creak of leather and metal as she shouldered the weapon. Behind the glass, the range staff watched without comment. They knew her, Becky Hart had been coming to Redwood Valley Range every other Saturday for 3 years. She never made a scene. She always cleaned up after herself. She never bragged, never posted on social media, never brought friends, just her and the rifle. Same lane, same pace, same silence. But none of that earned her protection from the jeers. The boys in camo kept talking. Bet she can't even load it, one said, nudging the others. I'll laugh so hard if that thing jams. Becky gently thumbed the on-block clip into the receiver. The mechanical ping as it locked into place echoed with a strange weight, like the sound had traveled decades to be heard. She adjusted her stance, one foot slightly back, hips relaxed, shoulders square, and closed her eyes briefly. A breath in, a breath out. To them, she was just a quiet woman with an old rifle. But what they didn't see, what they'd never understand, was that this wasn't just about firing shots. It was about honoring the hands that had held that rifle before her. It was about carrying something heavier than metal, and she wasn't going to explain it to anyone. She would let the rifle speak. Becky took one step back from the bench, squared her shoulders, and set her feet. Her stance wasn't modern, at least not by today's tactical standards. No wide combat-ready crouch. No squared-up posture mimicking YouTube instructors in body armor. Hers was quieter, older. The kind of stance formed before there were GoPros strapped to barrels. Her back foot turned slightly inward, heel rooted with intention. Elbow locked like it was built into the frame of the rifle itself. Chin low, cheekbone pressed softly to the worn walnut stock. It was a stance taught not by doctrine, but by memory. And just then, on the walkway behind the glass partition, General Andrew Callahan stopped walking. He had come that morning in civilian clothes, beige windbreaker, pressed khaki slacks, a plain cap low over his silver hair. Most at the range didn't recognize him. He wasn't in uniform and he didn't carry the air of someone trying to be noticed. But for those who knew, his reputation preceded him. 4-star general, 39 years of service, 2 distinguished service crosses, and the kind of quiet command presence that silenced rooms without a word. He had been invited to Redwood Valley Range by a local ROTC sponsor to observe the facility. A routine visit, nothing ceremonial. Until he passed lane 4, until he saw her. Becky, unaware of the eyes now locked on her, raised the M1 Garand and took her first breath. The general froze mid-step. His coffee, raised halfway to his lips, didn't move. His gaze narrowed, his brow furrowed, not in confusion but recognition. Because that stance, it wasn't just unusual, it was identical. His mind slipped back to a cold rooftop in Kosovo, 1999. Operation Winterlock. A sniper position had been compromised. Enemies were pressing hard through the city ruins. One man held the line alone, firing from a rooftop with an M1 Garand of all things. The same distinctive posture, the same foot placement, the same eerie calm. Callahan, then a young field officer, had seen it from a secondary position 3 blocks away. That rifle's rhythm, measured and precise, had held off the approach until reinforcements arrived. He remembered the after-action report. Sergeant Edward Hart, 82nd Airborne, 12 confirmed hits, 1 fractured collarbone, refused extraction until the building was clear. But that name had stayed with him. That stance had stayed with him. And now, here it was again, 30 years later, on an American range, wrapped in denim and humility. The general lowered his cup slowly, eyes locked on Becky like he was staring at a ghost. Not the ghost of her, but of the man who once stood in that exact same position, with that exact same steel in his bones. There are some things time doesn't erase, and posture, true, earned posture, is one of them. The silence on the range held for 1 breath longer than usual. Then came the first shot. Crack. The M1 Garand barked like something alive, not mechanical, not digital. It didn't click or whine like modern rifles. It spoke. And when it spoke, it didn't ask for attention. It demanded it. The first round punched through the target at 50 yards, dead center. A heartbeat later, the second followed, just left of the first, then the third, then fourth. By the 5th shot, the group of young men who had laughed earlier had gone quiet. 2 of them leaned forward now, heads tilted as if trying to understand what they were seeing. The laughter had vanished. What replaced it was something slower, heavier. Recognition wrapped in disbelief. The cadence of her shooting wasn't aggressive. It wasn't even fast. But it was flawless, smooth transitions between breaths. Every shot timed to the rise and fall of her lungs. No wasted movement, no unnecessary adjustments. Just calm repetition. Control layered over muscle memory so old it didn't need to think anymore. Crack, crack, crack. 8 shots, 8 echoes. Then the soft, metallic ping of the empty clip ejecting, a sound older than most of the people. Standing on that range, the general hadn't moved, not since the first shot. His hand still holding the half-raised coffee cup slowly lowered to his side. His face didn't shift much, but the corners of his lips tightened. His eyes followed every movement, not just of the rifle, but of her form. Her stillness between shots, the tiny adjustments, the foot that never wobbled, the elbow that didn't twitch. It wasn't just accuracy, it was reverence. He'd seen elite marksmen fire with deadly skill. He'd reviewed sniper footage and trained alongside some of the most disciplined soldiers in the armed forces. But this was different. This wasn't training. It was inheritance. When the last shot landed and the clip chimed into silence, Becky exhaled and lowered the rifle. Still, she didn't turn. Still no dramatics. She simply set the rifle gently on the bench and reached for a fresh clip. Like nothing had happened, the general finally moved. He stepped forward, slowly, deliberately, like a man approaching a memorial, not a shooter. Conversations around the range dimmed. People sensed the shift in atmosphere. Staff behind the counter straightened. Even those who hadn't been watching looked up now, drawn to something they didn't yet understand. Becky noticed the movement at her periphery but didn't flinch. She loaded the next clip with the same silent grace. "Excuse me," came a voice, calm, gravel-lined, unmistakably authoritative. "Name?" Becky turned. Not startled, just curious. "Becky Hart," she replied, brushing a lock of hair behind her ear. "Why?" The general stepped closer now, just a few feet away. His eyes searched hers, not harshly, but deeply. "Your grandfather, Edward Hart?" he asked. She nodded, unsure of where this was going. The general's voice dropped lower, the trace of memory thick in his words. "I've seen that stance once before," he said. 30 years ago. Kosovo, rooftop. He held the line for hours. We thought he was done, but he wasn't. He never missed." He paused, taking in the sight of her. Calm, composed, still standing exactly as the man he once owed his life to. And for the first time in years, he felt the weight of something deeper than service. He saw legacy. The general stood still for a moment longer, as if confirming to himself that he wasn't mistaken, that the years hadn't warped the memory. Then, with the unmistakable authority of a man who had spent a lifetime giving orders without needing to raise his voice, "Tuwesha Suryawas Sum," he asked simply. "Name." His tone cut through the soft hum of conversations on the range. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp. Everyone nearby turned toward the source. Even the laughing young men grew quiet, eyes shifting between the general and the woman they had mocked just minutes earlier. Becky looked up from the bench. There was no fear in her eyes, just quiet curiosity. "Becky Hart," she said, brushing a smudge off the rifle's upper handguard. "Why?" He took a step closer, the toes of his boots stopping just shy of the edge of her lane. His expression softened, but his eyes held something far heavier. Recognition. "Your grandfather. What was his name?" She straightened slightly, unsure why this man, this stranger, was asking. But she answered anyway. "Edward Hart, Sergeant, 82nd Airborne, retired in '92. He passed away a few years ago." The general's breath caught. "Edward Hart, Kosovo, 1999, rooftop, snow blowing sideways through a broken skyline, a squad pinned down. A young officer, radio to his ear, told command that the fallback route had collapsed. And then, a report from a nearby roof, a lone Garand cracking through the chaos. Precise, unrelenting, it held back a flank long enough for extraction. 12 confirmed hits. 1 broken collarbone. And the last man off the roof had refused morphine until every round had been accounted for. The general's voice dropped to a whisper. "Your grandfather saved my life." Becky blinked. "He never told me names, just that he did what needed doing." He nodded. "That sounds like him." And then, without warning, he turned to the range. The crowd had grown, other shooters, instructors, staff, even the young men who had jeered now, standing silent, eyes fixed on the unfolding scene. "You're looking at legacy," the general said aloud. His voice wasn't raised, but it didn't need to be. "That rifle doesn't just shoot, it remembers. It remembers the hands that carried it through cities no one can pronounce. It remembers the weight of silence between shots. It remembers discipline, patience, purpose. Sadasum," he gestured to Becky, not dramatically, not to embarrass her, but with reverence. "This stance, this form, I've only seen it once before. It's not in any manual. It wasn't taught in any boot camp. It came from experience passed down through blood. Nem. The range was utterly still. The young man in camo, the one who had mocked her the loudest, stood now with his arms folded, his jaw tight, shame coloring his face. Becky said nothing. She didn't gloat. She didn't even smile. She just stood as she had before, quiet, composed, steady. The general turned back to her, his expression solemn. "May I?" She understood before he finished asking. She nodded and gently handed the rifle to him. He took it in his hands like holding a memory and ran his fingers over the wood. His thumb passed over the faded initials carved near the sling mount. He inhaled slowly, as if breathing in history itself. Then he stepped back and gave her a salute. Not casual, not polite. A crisp, formal, perfect military salute. Rendered not just to the weapon, but to the woman who carried it. The woman who carried a legacy. The general stood for a long, reverent moment with the rifle cradled in his arms. He didn't inspect it like a collector or admire it like a historian. He held it like a soldier who knew exactly what it meant to carry steel that had once split. Silence in a war zone. His fingers gently traced the grain of the wood where sweat and time had left their mark, where initials had been carved with a dull pocket knife long before most of the people at the range were born. The weight of the rifle was familiar, not just physically but emotionally. Like an old comrade you hadn't seen in decades. He turned it slightly, his eyes landing on the outline of the parachute symbol etched near the butt plate. The engraving was crude, almost childlike, but it had survived decades. Just like the man who'd carried it. General Callahan looked back up at Becky. He didn't just pass down a rifle, he said quietly. He passed down discipline, focus, something most people can't see until it's standing right in front of them. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Her hands were still, but her chest rose slightly faster than before. From behind the glass in the range office, one of the younger staffers, a part-time employee in his 20s, raised his phone. He wasn't sure what was happening, but something about the scene told him it mattered. The general's stature, the woman's silence, the way everyone had fallen still. He hit record. Out on the line, the general raised the M1 Garand to chest level. Then slowly, he brought his right hand to his brow and delivered a perfect military salute. Not a gesture of recognition, not one of politeness, but a salute rendered with precision and meaning, directed at both the rifle and the woman who now carried its story forward. Gasps were audible, not dramatic, not loud, just soft intakes of breath from those witnessing something sacred in the most unexpected place. A Saturday morning at a public firing range. Becky's lips parted slightly, but she said nothing. She stood motionless, her expression holding, but her fingers curled tighter against her thigh. When the general stepped forward and offered the rifle back to her, she reached for it with both hands, their fingers brushed. And though the weapon had been passed from one soldier to another countless times before, this handoff was different. The steel was cold, but the warmth in his eyes was unmistakable. "Thank you," she said, barely above a whisper. He gave her a small nod, then took one step back. Becky held the rifle to her chest, not like a weapon, but like a memory. Her grip was firm, but her arms trembled slightly as the weight returned to her. Not from fear, not even from pride, from gravity, emotional gravity. All around them, no one moved. Even the men who had laughed before now stood awkwardly behind the line, silent, hands in their pockets, unsure what to do with themselves. The young man with the phone lowered it, blinking hard, realizing too late that he hadn't captured just a cool moment. He had documented a turning point. Within an hour, the video would be posted to the range's modest social media page. Within 12, it would be everywhere. But in that moment, before any clicks, shares, or headlines, there was just the rifle, the hands that carried it, and the silence that had finally learned to listen. By Sunday evening, the video had already made the rounds in a few niche veteran forums. At first, it had no title, just a shaky handheld clip taken by a young range employee, with no music, no edits. The caption was simple. She didn't flinch, but he saluted. What caught attention wasn't the rifle, or even the general. It was the stillness, the silence. The way a hardened four-star general had stood at full attention and saluted a civilian woman, without fanfare, without words, and the way she'd received it without so much as a smile. Veterans recognized something unspoken. Within 24 hours, it spread like fire through military subreddits, Facebook groups, and veteran communities. People commented in all caps. Others just posted their service branch and years served as if to say, I saw it too. I understand. Someone found her name in the video's comments. Someone else dug up the general service record. Then came the blogs. Then came the headlines. She didn't inherit rank. She inherited fire. Legacy Reloaded, the woman who fired a memory. One stance, two wars apart. A retired Marine sniper wrote, I've seen thousands of shooters, but what I saw in her posture, that's ancestral. That's war in the blood. The range staff gave a statement. We don't chase clicks, but this one found us. What you saw wasn't a performance. It was reverence, and we're proud to have witnessed it. Becky didn't speak to the media. She didn't open a TikTok. She didn't sign anything. She just kept coming to the range. Same lane, same rifle, same silence. But one letter did find its way to her mailbox, handwritten in shaky penmanship. The return address scribbled on the back of a cheap envelope. It was from the young man who had mocked her that morning. His name was Tyler Reese, 24, a weekend shooter, loud, confident, until that day. His letter didn't try to defend his behavior. He didn't mention his gear or his kill streaks on digital games. He just got honest. Ma'am, I didn't know who you were. But worse than that, I didn't think I had anything to learn. My grandfather served in Korea. He had a box in his garage labeled old stuff. I never opened it. After what I saw that day, I did. There was a rifle, cleaning kit, a folded flag, and a letter to my dad I never knew existed. I read it all. For the first time in my life, I asked my grandmother about him. Turns out he was a lot like you, quiet, didn't talk much, but now I think I understand why. Thank you for not answering us that day. Thank you for letting the rifle speak. And thank you for reminding me that respect isn't a noise. It's a posture. Becky didn't write him back. She didn't need to. Instead, weeks later, she left a note for him at the front counter. Simple, direct. Sunday, 10 a.m., lane 7. Bring that rifle from the garage. Let's see how it breathes. The staff knew not to ask questions, and Tyler showed up. Because sometimes redemption doesn't come with punishment. It comes with permission to grow. The invitation came in a plain manila envelope. No email, no PR agency. Just a letter with a Fort Benning return address and a handwritten note from a commanding officer who had seen the video and recognized something that couldn't be taught. Becky Hart didn't know what to make of it at first. She wasn't a speaker. She wasn't trained in public engagement, and she certainly didn't see herself as a symbol. But the letter was personal, not performative. It didn't ask her to give a speech about being a woman in a man's space. It didn't want her to talk about breaking barriers. It asked her to talk about something far more specific. Come teach them how to stand, not how to shoot. They've got instructors for that. Teach them what you know, the part that doesn't come in manuals. So she went. Fort Benning, Georgia, the very heart of infantry training. Home to thousands of boots on gravel and echoes of drill sergeants. She wore no uniform, just jeans, boots, and the 82nd Airborne cap that once belonged to her grandfather. The auditorium was full, mostly new recruits. Some seasoned drill instructors leaned against the back wall with crossed arms, curious more than skeptical. Becky didn't pace the stage. She didn't deliver a monologue. She walked quietly to the front, set her M1 Garand down gently on a table, and rested her hands on either side. I'm not here to show you how to shoot, she began. I'm here to talk about how you carry what you've been given. She didn't speak long. She spoke slow. She talked about posture, not just where to place your feet, but why you place them. About breathing, not to steady a shot, but to honor a moment. About focus, not on the target, but on the history behind the trigger. She never raised her voice. She didn't need to. And by the end, even the instructors in the back stood a little straighter. Word spread quickly. That same week, Becky received over 50 emails from women across the country, daughters and granddaughters of veterans who'd seen the viral video and written to say one version of the same thing. He left me a rifle, but I never knew what to do with it. That's when she launched The Weight of Steel, a Sunday morning program hosted quietly at Redwood Valley Range. It wasn't a shooting class in the traditional sense. No drills, no speed challenges, no competitions, just daughters of veterans, standing, learning, listening. The first hour of every session had no live fire at all. They learned how to breathe, how to set their shoulders, how to listen for the history in the steel. Becky told them, this isn't about hitting the bullseye. It's about not dishonoring the hands that held it before you, and they understood. Not all of them became expert marksmen. But every one of them left understanding that legacy isn't about doing what someone did before. It's about understanding why they did it and carrying it forward, quietly, with purpose. Something shifted at Redwood Valley Range. It didn't happen all at once, and it didn't come with banners or news crews. But after that morning, after the general's salute, after the video, after Becky's quiet return to Lane 4, a quiet current began to move through the place. A kind of reverence had settled in, not enforced, but inherited. 1 month later, the range owner, retired Marine Sergeant Glenn Dobson, added a new plaque above Lane 4. It read simply, Heritage Lane. Some rifles carry more than bullets. From that point on, Lane 4 was reserved every Sunday for legacy shooters, those who came with rifles passed down, from parents, grandparents, great-uncles. It wasn't just about firepower anymore. It was about what the weapon had survived, what it had witnessed. The staff implemented a new rule, not official, not required, but gently encouraged. If it's your first time on the range, you listen to a story before you fire. The stories varied. Some were short, a paragraph at most. Others were longer, told by veterans who finally found the words decades after returning home. Some spoke of battles, others of letters never mailed. Some told no war stories at all, just memories of their father cleaning a rifle every Sunday, humming an old Johnny Cash song, never saying where or why he learned to hold the stock that way. And they were all read, sometimes by Becky, sometimes by others, quietly, calmly. Before the first shot cracked the morning air, it transformed the atmosphere. People slowed down. They listened more. They handled their weapons with greater care. It wasn't just a place to shoot anymore. It became a place to remember. Soon others began to bring their heritage pieces out from the dark. A Korean war carbine carried by a man's father through sub-zero trenches. A weathered Colt 1911 used by a woman's grandfather during jungle patrols in Vietnam. Even a longbow, hand-carved by a Wabuturi veteran who served in the OSS, passed to his great-grandson who had no military record, but carried every lesson from the man who taught him how to aim. They weren't trophies, they were echoes. The range, once filled with modern black polymer in tactical bravado, began to resemble something else entirely on weekends. A living museum, not filled with glass cases and quiet halls, but with motion, with memory and use. People began calling it the museum that fires back. No one charged admission. You just had to listen before you pulled the trigger. And Becky, who had never set out to be a teacher, a voice, or a symbol, found herself quietly shaping a new kind of community. Not one built on gear or rankings, but on lineage, on shared silence, on stories held in steel and walnut, waiting for someone to fire them forward. Even the mocking voices from before had softened. Tyler Reese, now a regular on Sundays, had taken to helping clean up after sessions. He didn't speak much, but when he did, it was only to ask, "What's the story behind yours?" No one sneered anymore. Because the rifles being fired at Redwood Valley Range didn't just make noise. They made history visible, and no one wanted to be the one who talked over that. General Andrew Callahan's retirement ceremony was held beneath a steel-gray sky at Fort Bragg. No jets, no parade. He didn't want spectacle. After 4 decades of service, what mattered to him wasn't applause, it was truth. His final address was short, measured, and quietly reflective. He thanked his family, his unit, his mentors. But toward the end, his voice shifted, slowed. "I once saw a young woman fire with her grandfather's ghost behind her," he said, his words steady but heavy. "She didn't raise her voice. She didn't raise her rank. She just stood in a way that told me everything I needed to know." He paused. And everyone else had learned to shut up and listen. Those in uniform didn't clap. They didn't need to. They understood. Back at Redwood Valley Range, the world moved on. But Becky didn't. Every Sunday morning, rain or shine, she returned to Lane 4. She didn't bring an entourage. No speeches, no cameras. Just her M1 Garand wrapped in its oiled cloth, a pouch of brass rounds, and a quiet routine honed not for performance, but for remembrance. Same stance, same breath, same rhythm. The rifle still spoke. Crack, crack, crack. Each shot was placed deliberately, not just aimed, but considered. To the casual observer, it might look like a woman practicing. But those who had stood beside her knew better. She wasn't practicing, she was preserving. Preserving a rhythm born on rooftops, in frozen forests, in jungles and fields, passed from shoulder to shoulder across generations. Her foot placement wasn't technique, it was inheritance. Her silence wasn't shyness, it was discipline. And the sound of the M1 Garand? It wasn't just fire, it was memory. The ping of the clip ejecting didn't just signal an empty chamber. It signaled a story finished. A page turned, a name remembered. New shooters at the range would sometimes stop mid-preparation when they heard it, looking up, sensing something different in the cadence. Veterans knew. They always knew. Legacy wasn't a statue, it was motion. And as long as Lane 4 echoed with that steady rhythm, Becky wasn't just honoring the past. She was carrying it forward. In a world rushing toward newer, faster, louder, sometimes the most powerful thing is silence. A quiet stance, a worn rifle, a memory carried forward without ever needing to be explained. Becky Hart's story isn't just about a rifle, it's about responsibility, about the weight of something handed to you, not because it's flashy, but because it's true. In today's America, where so much is measured by noise and image, this story reminds us that character isn't built on display, it's built in stillness, in consistency, in legacy. Maybe you didn't serve, maybe your father or grandfather did, and left behind a box, a letter, a jacket, or a story you've never asked about. Maybe now's the time. We want to hear from you. What was passed down to you? What legacy lives in your home, your name, or your habits, even if it doesn't hang on a wall? And do you think we're doing enough today to preserve what truly matters? Share it in the comments. Your voice may remind someone else to look again at the things they've taken for granted. And if you believe, like we do, that honor doesn't age and memory deserves motion, then please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell so you don't miss future stories like this. To all our veterans, our families, and every quiet caretaker of a fading name, thank you. You are why we tell these stories. Because the truth is, some weapons don't rust, some echoes don't fade, and some legacies don't end. They continue. We'll see you next time, right here, where stories still stand.